In our lesson today, we are going to talk about fractions, decimals, and percents. Mostly how they relate to each other, how they're kind of the same idea, and then also how they differ. I'm beginning with three representations of one whole. We're going to use a circle to represent one whole. Now, fractions, decimals, and percents are all ways of representing a part of a whole. So we're going to call this our fraction circle, our decimal circle, and our percents circle. And let's talk about the ways that we represent these wholes in each of these numbers. If we're talking about a fraction, if we're representing 1 as a fraction, one whole is how much? Well, it's just 1, right? 1 divided by 1, 1 over 1, that's going to equal 1. So this whole as a fraction is just 1. Same thing with a decimal. We can say, well, one whole is 1.00, and we can have a bunch of zeros or 1 0 or no zeros at all. As a decimal, one whole is 1. As a percent, though, what makes a percent different is if you have one whole, and we're talking about the percent, a percent is not 1%, it's 100%. So that's how we represent the whole as a percent. And I want you to think about, how do we get from 1 to 100? And each of them are talking about the same amount of a whole. So that's very interesting. Now I'm going to take each of these and divide them. And I'm going to divide them right down the middle. And they're not going to be super accurate, forgive me. Okay? What I've done here is I'm going to say, okay, I've broken them all up the same way. What is this as a fraction? Should all be something that you're relatively familiar with. Well, this is 1/2. So as a fraction, I can represent that as 1/2. How about as a decimal? How do we represent 1/2 as a decimal? 5/10. Okay, so that's 0.5. But what about as a percent? How comfortable are you with saying, well, what is 1/2 as a percent? Most of you are going to know that that's 50%. Okay? And in all three of these cases, we're talking about 1/2. Interesting. 1/2 is 5/10 as a decimal. 5/10 is 50% as a percent. How are we moving from 1 to 100, from 5/10 to 50 numerically? We're going to do one more. I'm going to divide this yet again. And I'm going to say this. Now each of these wholes have 4 equal parts. Okay, that's the way we're going to look at this. If I color in, and I just want you to look at the orange sector. If I color in this piece right here, now just focus on the orange piece now. How much of the whole is that? How much of the whole? 4 equal pieces. That orange piece is going to be 1/4, right? 1/4. And we can also say 1/4 as 1/4. That helps me when I think about the decimal version. 1/4. Most of us are probably pretty comfortable with saying, well, a quarter, that's like 25 cents. I know how to represent that as a decimal. That's 0.25 or 25 hundredths. 25 hundredths is like 25 cents. Relate it to money. And then as a percent, 1/4 is 25%. It's very interesting. And then here we're working with a quarter. So I want you to focus on the relationships from the decimal to the percent. How are we getting from here to here? How are we getting from 5/10 to 50? How are we getting from 25 hundredths to 25? Well, how do you numerically, and think multiplicatively, get from 1 to 100? You don't add 99, I'm not talking addition. Multiply by 100. Okay, if I multiply by 100, from 1 times 100, do I get 100? Yeah. How about 5/10 times 100? Sure enough, I'm going to get 50. 25 hundredths times 100 is going to give me 25. So that's how decimals and percents are related. Okay? Now here's the definition of a percent. A percent is a ratio of a number to 100. A ratio, which we may have gotten to already or we will get to later, a ratio is a comparison of two numbers by division. And we like to look at division with fraction bars, so you're going to see a lot of comparisons among ratios, percents, fractions, and division. They all kind of fall in the same realm. It's really cool how we can connect all of those concepts together. So again, a percent is a ratio of a number to 100. So if I was talking about 40%, we would write that and could write that as 40 to 100 or 40 over 100 or 40 hundredths. 40 hundredths is 40%. 75% can be written as 75 hundredths. 200% can be written as 200 hundredths. It's a comparison of a number to 100, okay, by division. So if we come back to 75% here, we know that 25% is 1/4 as a fraction. I wanted to show you here that because I can write 75% as 75 hundredths, if I simplify 75 hundredths, that to me is 3/4. And how perfect sense does that make? 3/4 is 75 cents. 75 cents is 75% of a dollar. All sorts of links there that can help you understand how percents work. 200%, well, 200% is more than one whole, right? Because one whole is 100%. So 200%, it makes sense that it would be more than one because 200 hundredths simplifies to 2. Right. So to write a percent as a fraction, you write the percent amount as the numerator with a denominator of 100. I missed that. Is the denominator of 100. That goes here. Period. Okay? Then simplify if necessary, and I've kind of gone through that up here for you. All right. So there are lots of methods to changing percents to decimals to fractions and moving among them. There are lots and lots and lots of ways to do that. I'm going to give you as simple as ways as I can. So first, writing percents as decimals. Some of you may already know a shortcut, but I want you to think of why that shortcut works. As we learned in our first board, to get from percents to decimals, there's that multiplicative 100 in there, isn't there? So to go from a percent to a decimal, then you take that percent and you divide by 100. So if I had 50%, what is 50% as a decimal? Well, we've already worked with that, but to prove it, I can say, well, 50%, I'm going to divide 50 by 100. 50 divided by 100, I have to add my decimal points. 100 goes into 500 5 times, and then I'm left with 0.5. 5/10 equals 50%. Another way is I can write the percent as a fraction over 100, then simplify and convert it to a decimal by division. So, for example, 250%, we know that that's more than one whole, so keep that in mind. 250%, well, I know any percent is a comparison to 100, so I can write that as a fraction. And then I can simplify. This is just dividing by 1 here, so I'm not changing any values. 50 goes evenly into both, that's why I do 50/50ths. I get down to 5/2, and I can say, well, then I can just divide 5 by 2. 5 divided by 2 comes out to be 2.5, or 2 5/10, 2.5. 250% is the same as 2 5/10. Excuse me, is equal to, not the same as. Oh man, my boards are falling. Writing decimals as percents now, so this is going in the opposite direction. If to write a percent as a decimal we divided by 100, then we can multiply by 100, just the opposite here, to get to a percent from a decimal. So I'm going to do this one first. If I have 1 23 hundredths and I want to know what that is as a percent, I can just multiply by 100. Here I've done the math the long way, and I get 123, so that's 123%. Something else to think about that I've kind of hit on earlier, here's 5 hundredths. 5 hundredths as a percent, well, I multiply by 100, and I get 5%. 5%. Why does that make sense? Relate that to money for a second. If you have 5 cents, which is what this looks like, right? If you have 5 cents, what percent of a dollar do you have? 5% of a dollar. It's interesting, right? You could also write the decimal as a fraction, then rewrite the fraction with the denominator of 100 to write as a percent. It's kind of a longer way, but if you're more comfortable, then you can do that. So for example, if I have 0.2 2/10, 2/10, that's 2/10, so I can write it as a fraction. But this doesn't have a denominator of 100, so I cannot say that that's 2% because I can only say that if I had a denominator of 100. But if I multiply by 1 here, and you might be saying, well, that's 10/10. 10 divided by 10 is 1. So I'm technically just multiplying by 1. I keep the value. This is 20 hundredths. Now that it's over 100, comparing to 100, I can say, well, that numerator is my percent, 20%. How about writing a fraction as a percent? You can. Here's one thing you can do. You can rewrite the fraction with a denominator of 100 if possible, like we just did on our previous board here. Then write as a percent. And this is only if possible. It's not always going to be possible. Your denominator must be a number that goes evenly into 100 for this to work. If I have 3/25, immediately I know 25 goes into 100 evenly. So if I rewrite this fraction by multiplying by 4/4, I get 12 hundredths. 12 hundredths is equivalent to 3/25, and because it has a denominator of 100, I know that 3/25 is equivalent to 12%. Awesome. Love that method. But sometimes you may have a fraction that doesn't have a denominator that evenly goes into 100 to represent our percent that way. So you have to look at this fraction as an unsimplified division problem, which is what fractions are. So we can divide the numerator by the denominator to get a decimal value and then convert the decimal to a percent. We should be comfortable converting decimals to percents by multiplying by 100. So if I take 3/8, I'm going to divide 3 by 8. That's what it looks like over here. 3 divided by 8. You know, you have to add your decimal and your zeros, go through that long division, you get 375 thousandths. It's kind of wild, right? 375 thousandths. So this is my decimal value. Now I know how to turn a decimal into a percent. I multiply by 100. And then here I end up with 37.5. 37.5%. Okay, remember when you multiply, you don't just get 37.5. It's representing part of a whole, so it's 37.5%. Love it. So let's work through a few of these really quickly. Write 88% as a fraction in simplest form. Well, percent is a comparison to 100. And so I can say, well, that's, why did I do it like that? 88 over 100, 88 hundredths, right? 88%. But then it says in simplest form. So I can tell you that I think 4 goes evenly into both of these. So I'll just simplify by dividing by 4/4. That's going to give me 22/25. Can I simplify that any further? I don't believe I can, so that would be my fraction in simplest form. How about write 51% as a decimal? How do I turn a percent to a decimal? I divide by 100. So 51 divided by 100. I'm going to have to put my little decimals there. 100 goes into 500. 5 times. That's 500. 100 remains. That's going to go in once. So 51 hundredths. You may be seeing that pattern now if you haven't seen it yet. So 51 hundredths is my answer. If you want to put that 0 there, you can. Write each decimal as a percent. So to change a decimal to a percent, I multiply by 100. I'm going to show you the pattern here in just a second, but I want to do the math first. So if I'm multiplying by 100, I'm going to say, well, 100 times 0.08. Remember, it doesn't matter which one goes on top and which one goes on the bottom because of the commutative property of multiplication. So that's going to be 0, 0, 8, and then zeros across the bottom. That's a 0. If I add it, it's 0, 0, 8, 0, and 2 decimal places. That gives me 8. So to get from 8 hundredths as a percent, that's 8%. Think about that. 8 hundredths. Well, yeah, of course. That's 8 hundredths, which I know is 8%. I probably should have just done it that way in the first place, but I can also multiply by 100, which is what I did. If you have noticed, maybe not, there is a decimal movement pattern, but I want you to understand why the decimal movement works the way it does. So to change a decimal to a percent, you can just move that decimal 2 times to the right and you will get the correct percent. So like here, 7/10 as a percent, you do have to move it twice because it is a multiplication by 100. If I move it twice, though, you're going to run into some problems when you run out of digits. There's nothing here, but technically there are zeros forever, right? And it doesn't actually change the value. So this 7/10, which I can say is 7/10, if I multiply by 10/10 here to get that denominator, that's 70/100ths. This is technically 70%, right? And that's what happened when I moved that decimal twice. I multiplied by 100. And so 7/10 turns into 70%, which is pretty awesome. I can dig it. How about write each fraction as a percent? 3/5. 5 goes evenly into 100, and I like that method quite a bit. So to turn 5 into 100, I know that it goes in 20 times, so I need to rewrite my fraction multiplying by 1 as 20/20ths. 3 times 20 is 60 over 100. 60 hundredths is 60%. Okay, very good, very good. How about 7/40ths? Does 40 go into 100 evenly? No, it doesn't. So let's go ahead and divide numerator by denominator. 7 divided by 40. And I'm going to do that over here in orange. 7 divided by 40. I know I have to add that decimal and a little bit of room. 40 goes into 70 once. It's 40. 30 left over. Let's bring down that 300. 40 goes into 300. 7 times would be 280. So we'll put that there. 2, bring down another 0. 20 left over, and then another 0, right? 40 goes into 200 5 times. So that's going to be 175 thousandths. And then how do we change that decimal to a percent? How do we do that? Well, again, we can take this method and move that decimal twice. That will get you an accurate answer. We can also get 17.5% by multiplying by 100. Okay? And so that is your comparison of fractions, decimals, and percents.